One fact about every single character in Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. We start on the Deliverance side of things with their frontman, Alm. Even though many modern Fire Emblem crossover games like Heroes, Warriors and Engage have branded Lyn as the de facto bow lord, Alm was actually the first lord to ever use bows, as his promoted class hero can use them. Keep in mind that although this class has the same name as another recurring class that even predates it from Shadow Dragon and also appears in Shadows of Valentia, the two classes are actually not the same thing, as evidenced by different Japanese names. And speaking of Japanese names, that was the only thing most of the characters of Gaiden had before their debut in the West in this remake. For most, their name was translated pretty literally and faithfully, but one notable exception was Tobin. In Japanese, his name is Robin, a perfectly functional English name, if it hadn't already been given to the main character of Awakening and one of the most prominent faces in the series, especially at the time of Echoes' release, and so Tobin had his name slightly altered. It's a nice name though, and I have a feeling Gray agrees with me. After all, there is a rare ending in the game that only occurs when Tobin dies during your journey, that has Gray naming his future child Tobin in honor of his fallen friend. Very nice touch. The final member of this original group of buddies, the way they appeared in Gaiden at least, also includes Cliff, of course, the youngest of the bunch. In fact, the Cliff you can play as during the prologue of the game is the youngest unit in Fire Emblem history with a confirmed age, being only 8 years old. I suggest we don't go breaking that record. Newly introduced in Echoes is a brand new member of the Ram Village crew, Faye. Although, I say newly introduced in Echoes, but the actual first game Faye appears in was Fire Emblem Heroes as a tie-in. That's just what we needed, another female Heroes OC. Either way, this situation kinda mirrors the one Roy found himself in Super Smash Bros. Melee all those years back, just in-house this time around. Oh, and similarly to Tobin, she too had her name changed for being too similar to a pre-existing character, as her Japanese name is Effie, like the unit from Fates. Next to join the crew, or rather recruit the crew, is Lucas. This sounds like a huge disrespect to all the legendary fighters from Shadow Dragon, but Lucas is actually the first ever soldier in Fire Emblem history. The class, that is. He's definitely not the first of what Webster's dictionary defines as one engaged in military service. We have a little voice actor fact for Silk, who's brought to life by Bonnie Gordon. Even though she hasn't worked on the Fire Emblem series again, she did go out with a bang, providing the vocals for the ending theme, The Heritors of Arcadia. If I had a nickel for every time a blue-haired, headdress-wearing Fire Emblem support unit in a 3DS game also sang the ending credits, I'd have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but it's weird it's happened twice. Anyway, next up, Claire. She's actually the only person we know of who owns a Pegasus Knight in the entirety of Sophia, showing they are a lot rarer here than they are in other continents. That said, thanks to reclassing, Faye can also become a Pegasus Knight, although this fact still holds up for Gaiden then of course. Her brother Clive could, I guess, be considered the most beloved character in the game, and turning Mourning the Dead into a competition at least. When a character dies in your playthrough, you can then later find characters mourning them with unique quotes, and out of all characters, Clive has the most characters expressing their sadness out of the entire cast. Lucas, Claire, Forsyth and Matilda all do so in the final game, while Fernand also has quotes remaining in the game files from when he was playable. Yes, Fernand was supposed to be playable in more than just a DLC, as also evidenced by further voice data, consider that your fact of the video for him. And when you're talking Clive and Fernand, Matilda is a logical next unit to cover, so how about we do just that? It's easy to miss as it's only shown in the base conversation with Alm, but Matilda actually has 4 sisters who she frequently exchanges letters with. We're all younger than her, but we don't ever find out anything more about them, unfortunately. But as we continue with the Deliverance, we end up at Forsyth, the second soldier in the Fire Emblem series. While his current design is completely unique and quite recognizable, Forsyth originally had a completely different look in Gaiden, like many characters in Echoes. What is interesting though is that Forsyth bore a striking resemblance to Wolf from Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem. I'm confident it's not intentional, but that doesn't mean the resemblance isn't remarkable. For Forsyth's childhood friend Python, I want to take a look at his official art, which depicts him with an iron bow. What's noteworthy about this is that Python doesn't actually join your army with a bow on hand, while Leon does, and this is also reflected in his official art. Instead, you need to give Python the bow you find in the Deliverance hideout in order to recreate this artwork, so to speak. Two more siblings are next up, starting with Lufie. For him, I want to take a look at the official Fire Emblem Gaiden manga, which, yes, exists, although it is of course a Japan exclusive and released all the way back in 1993. While Lufie for some bizarre reason didn't appear in this manga at all, he still ended up on printed paper between 1994 and 1990, when he makes a cameo in the manga adaptation for Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, as he visits Kadein, the city of magic in Arcania. Here it is further revealed he and Merrick have known each other for a very long time. His little sister Delphia also doesn't appear in the Gaiden manga, nor does she ever make a cameo, so we'll instead have to look somewhere else for a fact about her. Like her voice actress. Delphia is voiced by Christine Marie Cabanos, who went on to voice Happy in the next game in the series, Free Houses. She just has the perfect voice for mages, I suppose. As we continue to the late game Alm editions, we find another lovely couple, Tatiana and Zeke. Even though Tatiana's design for Shadows of Valentia is completely original, her old portrait for Gaiden is clearly derived or perhaps even edited from Nina's portrait from Shadow Dragon. Her Japanese name is likely also based on Nina's, as it's Tida, replacing the N's with T's essentially. This is clearly a reference to Kamui from Shadow Dragon, who Zeke bears a striking resemblance to and is definitely not the same person as. And speak of the devil, according to the art book of the game, Conrad ends up giving his mask to Ezekiel after the events of the game, which Zeke then brings along to Arcania where he gifts it to Sirius, tying these two games together even more, like 25 years after they released. And finally, for Alm's path at least, we have General Myson. While he may be the last unit to join, he is of course also playable in the prologue, although there are some interesting differences between the two Mysons, so to speak. In the prologue, he is actually lower leveled, but has better stats than he has when he eventually joins your side permanently, which might be an oversight or a reference to how he has gotten older, as in leveled up, but since at his age that usually doesn't mean improving, his stats have actually decreased. On to the other half of the map, starting once again with the Lord, the first ever leading lady, Celica. Or Cecilia if you are one of the localizers of Awakening, because during the promo run for the DLC that featured Celica, she originally had her name localized as Cecilia, which is of course the same name as a character from Binding Blade, probably causing the localizers to alter that before release, assuming it was even intentional in the first place. For her two retainers, I guess is the word, we have some food facts. Boey is fond of plain foods and is the only character in the game to enjoy all three kinds of seafood, being herrings, dried shellfish and Dagon filet. This is most likely a reference to his upbringing as the son of a fisherman. May on the other hand is the pickiest eater in the entire game, albeit tied with Atlas, who I didn't really take for a picky eater if I'm being honest, but oh well. Funnily enough, May's voice actress, Shirami Lei, also voices Cecilia in Fire Emblem Heroes, so I guess she would be tied with Cecilia no matter which character it would end up being. Every single character in Shadows of Valentia has at least one support conversation, Jenny included, but because her only conversational option is Sonya, she can actually break that trend if you end up picking Dean for your army, becoming the only character in the game without support conversations, although she does have Celica, Boey, May and Noma as passive supports. However, it is possible she ends up providing a lot of support love for another character, although we head into speculative territory here. In the aforementioned Gaiden manga, Jenny actually ends up developing feelings for Saber, and the pair end up together. While this is obviously not canon, Shadows of Valentia does leave room for this pairing. Jenny's ending mentions she fell in love with an unexpected man, which Saber definitely qualifies as, and his ending mentions an unnamed lovely wife, which could be Jenny. Calling this pairing a fact is a bridge too far, but the fact this possibility even exists is noteworthy in and of itself, I'd say. Next up, the mercenary trio of Velbar, Leon and Kamui. Even though Velbar's recognizable helmet being present in his 3D model is entirely class dependent, it will actually always be present in his map sprite, a strange inconsistency. For Leon, we once again look at name shenanigans, and yes, these truly are shenanigans, a classic switcheroo in fact. Leon's Japanese name actually does not have that final N, so it's Leo, like the character from Fates, but funnily enough, this is actually the other way around for him. Leo's Japanese name is Leon, meaning these two have their names switched between English and Japanese. Kamui is actually in a somewhat similar position, as that name is used in Japan for Korin, Leo's brother, sort of. Furthermore, Kamui's voice actor, Bryce Papenbrook, has also done the voice of several Heroes versions of characters and voices Henry in Awakening. But you may perhaps know him best as the voice of Eren Yeager, the main character of Attack on Titan. From one trio to another as we look at the White Wings next, specifically looking for facts that apply to Shadows of Valentia only. We continue with a voice acting fact for Palla, who is voiced by Alexa Tipton in Echoes, making her the only voice actor to voice 2 playable characters in this game, as she also provides the voice for Claire. A fact that applies to both her and Katria, and even Atlas at that, is that if you move Celica on the world map to the north of the mountain village without clearing Grief Citadel, they will leave the party, since they're only in this to rescue their siblings. And finally, for Est, although this too applies to her sisters, their official artwork for Echoes depicts them holding a lance that does not exist in-game. In fact, it doesn't really resemble any lance from the entire series, although the Iron Lance is probably what it is intended to be. We already mentioned him a couple times, so we might as well give him his fact properly now: Atlas. A bit of a rewrite actually occurred for him between Gaiden and Echoes, as in Gaiden he'll mention having brothers and sisters, while in Echoes he exclusively has brothers. I guess it is possible he still has sisters and just doesn't mention them, but that in and of itself is interesting. Jesse is also introduced around this part of the game, although evidence shows he isn't actually all that popular. In the first ever Choose Your Legends ballot in Fire Emblem Heroes, Jesse received the least amount of votes out of any unit in the game, ending up with an equal number as Grief. Yes, Grief. The crime lord who serves as minor antagonist received the same amount of votes as Jesse, a playable character that will remain in your army for the entire game. That's harsh. On to the duo of the big choice, Sonya and Dean. Sonya is the only female character in the game that dislikes sweet food, which is not exactly a useful fact, but hey, I never said all facts would be. Similar to the White Wings, Dean too holds a sword in his official artwork that doesn't resemble anything we can find in the actual game. His weapon bears somewhat of a resemblance to the steel sword, but the blade is ever so slightly different. For a similar fact, we must look at Noma, whose staff is slightly different between his official artwork and his model. It's clearly intended to be the same staff, but the design is not the same. The white handle is the most prominent difference. And finally, as far as playable characters go, we have Conrad, another new addition in the remake. He is the only character in the entirety of Fire Emblem Heroes, meaning out of 1,000 plus, to have a portrait that is not just a cropped version of his full artwork. His full art shows Conrad unmasked, but his portrait does feature his mask, meaning they're not identical. And while that is every playable character, we are also gonna cover some noteworthy NPCs, just like we did with Fernand earlier. For Renea and Berkut, something very interesting that I never noticed before, but is such a cool detail, is that in their final battle in Act 5, the attack ranges of the duo form hearts, with Renea's heart placed within Berkut's. This feels almost too fitting to be coincidental, but it's really rare for symbolism like this to show in what's usually a purely gameplay aspect, like attack ranges, so I guess the jury's still out on that. It's really cool either way. While Milla never sets foot on the battlefield in the games, she is featured as a unit, I guess is the word, in the card game Fire Emblem Cypher, where she has a unique class known as Goddess. In Fire Emblem Heroes, she instead appears as a dragon unit. Her brother Duma holds the record of Fire Emblem character with the most HP in one health bar, as he has a whopping 200 HP on hard mode, all contained to a single HP bar. While there are plenty of bosses with more HP than that, like Anankos and monsters from Free Houses, they all have multiple health bars as opposed to only one, like Duma. His underling Jedha is a fairly memorable villain from the game, I would say, but despite that, you actually could not vote for him for the first Choose Your Legends edition in Heroes. This must have been an oversight, as you could vote for villains from the game that are definitely less prominent, like Grief and the Sei. And speaking of which, quick fact for the Sei, he's the first ever unit to appear in a master class in the entire series, as it is impossible to obtain your third class in Gaiden before fighting him. And last but not least, Rudolph, which is actually not his name. In fact, he is the only character in the entire Fire Emblem series who is only known by his last name. We later find out that Alm's full name is Albain Alm Rudolph II, meaning Rudolph is the family's last name, and not the first name of the Emperor. Based on Alm's name, you could suggest Rudolph's full name is Albahin Alm Rudolph I, but this is not confirmed and doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So yeah, we have no clue what his first name actually is. And with that, we have truly covered them all. Have any facts of your own to add? Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.